Rain swept across the gray stone walls of Blackthorn Manor, a relentless curtain that blurred the horizon and carried the scent of wet earth into every drafty corridor. Inside, the great hall was dim and cold, its hearth long extinguished, but Duke Adrian of Blackthorn stood at the arched window as if carved from the same unyielding stone. The storm's howl could not compete with the silence that had ruled his life for 3 long winters. Lady Eleanor, his beloved, his anchor, had been claimed by fever, and with her passing the world had narrowed to a single point of duty, the small, bright soul of his daughter, Clara. He watched the rain as though it might reveal some answer to the ache that never eased. The nobility whispered of alliances and suitable brides, women of rank who might bring new wealth to his house and heirs to his line. Their letters piled like fallen leaves in his study, unopened and unanswered. He owed nothing to their ambitions. His heart lay in a grave on the manor grounds, and he would not betray its resting place. Clara's laughter sometimes reached him in those moments, a fragile echo of what life once was. She was 7 now, fearless and sharp-eyed, with a mischievous spirit that even the darkest halls could not suppress. Her chatter spilled through the echoing chambers, but grief is a cunning thief, it had stolen the warmth from Adrian's voice, leaving only a stern affection that he struggled to soften. He loved her fiercely, yet each day he feared she would remember him only as a shadow draped in black. The tutors came and went, as fleeting as birds in winter. Learned men from the capital, governesses with impeccable manners, none lasted. The manor's silence unnerved them, or perhaps it was the Duke himself, whose quiet intensity made the air feel heavy. They departed with polite excuses and veiled relief, until at last the household stood empty of instruction. Adrian told himself it mattered little, he would teach Clara what she truly needed to survive, a strong will, an unbreakable sense of honor. But as days slipped into weeks, he caught the flicker of loneliness in her eyes and knew that a child's heart could not thrive on duty alone. It was on a dusk soaked in rain that change arrived. The storm had deepened into a downpour that drummed against the shutters like 1,000 small fists when the steward appeared at the library door. "Your Grace," he said, voice muffled by the steady roar outside, "a new applicant for the governess post waits in the vestibule." She came despite the weather. Adrian turned from his books, the words on the page long meaningless, and followed the steward into the echoing hall. There, beneath the dripping archway, stood a young woman cloaked in plain wool, water glistening on the hem. She was not like the others who had come before with embroidered gloves and rehearsed curtsies. Her boots were muddied, her cheeks pink with cold, and her eyes, green as the moss in the manor's forgotten gardens, met his without hesitation. "Your name?" Adrian's voice carried the calm authority of a man accustomed to obedience. "Isabel Marin," she replied, her tone respectful but unwavering. "Daughter of Thomas Marin, the woodcarver of St. Meryl's." A commoner. He registered it in a breath, but something in her stance silenced the instinct to dismiss her. "You have cared for children." "I have raised my brothers and sisters since I could walk," she said. "And I read to the orphans of the church whenever my work allows. Children need stories to grow, Your Grace. Without them, they wither." The simplicity of her words pierced the heavy air. No practiced flattery, no trembling plea, only quiet conviction. He studied the fine line of her jaw, the way her damp hair clung to her cheek, the steadiness in her gaze. Behind him, the wind moaned through the stone corridors like a restless spirit. Clara peeked from behind the steward's coat, curiosity bright in her eyes. "Are you the one who will read to me?" she asked, her small voice a sudden flame of warmth. Isabel crouched to the child's height, the movement graceful despite her wet cloak. "If you will have me," she said, offering a smile that seemed to light the dim hall. Clara's answering grin was immediate, unguarded. Adrian felt a flicker in his chest, a sudden lift he had not known since Eleanor's laughter once filled these rooms. Perhaps it was that spark that decided him, though he told himself it was necessity. "You may begin at once," he said, surprising even the steward, who blinked at the swiftness of the appointment. Isabel inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Grace." As the steward led her to the guest chambers, Adrian watched the sway of her cloak, the quiet strength in each step. Something stirred, a ripple beneath years of still water. He dismissed it with a breath and turned back toward the window, but the storm beyond seemed to have changed its voice. That night, the manor felt less empty. From the corridor came the soft murmur of Isabel's voice reading by candlelight, Clara's delighted giggles answering like tiny bells. Adrian lingered outside the nursery door longer than he intended, listening to the cadence of a story he could not quite make out. Her words were gentle, yet they held a resonance that seeped through the walls, warming the stones themselves. Sleep did not come easily. He lay awake in his vast chamber, the storm easing to a gentle patter, and thought of the way Isabel had met his eyes, without fear, without deference, as if she saw not the Duke but the man hollowed by loss. It unsettled him. He had built his solitude like a fortress, yet in a single evening a stranger had found a gate he did not know existed. Morning arrived with a pale, watery sun. Clara burst into the dining hall, hair a tumble of curls, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Papa," she announced, "Miss Marin says she will teach me a new song today. One from the village. It has dancing." Adrian set aside the parchment he had been pretending to read. "You seem happy." "She listens," Clara said simply, as if that explained everything. He caught a glimpse of Isabel entering behind her, carrying a tray of fresh bread from the kitchen, sleeves rolled to the elbow. No noblewoman had ever entered his hall so plainly and yet commanded such presence. She placed the tray on the table and offered a polite nod. "Good morning, Your Grace." Her voice carried a quiet music that lingered long after she withdrew with Clara to begin the day's lessons. Adrian found himself staring at the empty doorway, the taste of warm bread forgotten on his tongue. By afternoon, the manor's rhythm had changed. Isabel's laughter wove through the cold corridors, and servants paused to listen as if catching the first notes of spring after a merciless winter. Adrian moved from room to room under the pretense of business, yet his path always seemed to lead near wherever she and Clara were. He told himself it was only to ensure his daughter's progress, but when he glimpsed them in the courtyard, Isabel guiding Clara's small hands through a simple dance, something deep within him stirred like a long-slumbering ember touched by wind. That evening, he stood once more at the great window, the rain finally spent. Moonlight washed the grounds, silvering the wet stone and black trees. Somewhere below, Clara's soft singing carried faintly, accompanied by the low murmur of Isabel's reply. The sound threaded through the night like a promise he could not name. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, a different tempest had begun, silent and unseen, swelling in the hollow spaces of his heart where grief had reigned too long. Days slipped into weeks, and with each passing dawn Isabel's presence threaded itself more deeply into the life of Blackthorn Manor. The once gloomy halls softened beneath the melody of her voice. Morning light found her first, spilling through tall windows to gild the copper strands of her hair as she led Clara in a gentle waltz across the marble floor. Adrian would pause in a doorway without meaning to, arrested by the sound of his daughter's laughter, a sound that rang against the stone walls like a hymn resurrecting the dead. The servants noticed. They exchanged sidelong glances when Isabel passed, their whispers curling through the manor like smoke seeking a vent. A commoner in the Duke's halls, a governess whose eyes linger too long, Adrian caught fragments as he moved through the corridors, but he gave them no voice, only a cool stare that silenced their tongues for a moment. Yet the rumors seated themselves in his mind like burrs that refused to be brushed away. He watched Isabel with a scrutiny he tried to deny. There was a quiet grace in the way she guided Clara's small fingers over the shapes of letters, in the patience with which she listened to the child's endless questions. She carried herself without the haughtiness of the court or the timidity of a servant. When she smiled, it was not the smile of someone seeking favor, but of someone who belonged entirely to the moment. Adrian found himself anticipating that smile, the low music of her laughter, the delicate tilt of her head as she listened to Clara's chatter. He told himself it was natural to appreciate a competent governess. Yet at supper, when she read aloud from a book of village tales, he lingered on the cadence of her voice long after the story's end. Then came the night the storm returned. The rain beat against the shutters with frantic urgency, and a chill settled in the manor's bones. Clara's laughter faltered, she pressed a small hand to her brow and swayed where she stood. Adrian caught her before she fell. Heat poured from her skin like fire. Panic seized him, sudden and merciless. He sent for the physicians, but the roads had flooded, and the message came back with a servant's trembling breath, they would not arrive until morning. Isabel did not hesitate. She carried Clara to her chamber, stoking the fire until it glowed, then settled beside the bed with a basin of cool water. Adrian remained at the door, a sentinel shadowed by helplessness, watching as Isabel bathed the child's face and whispered stories of brave maidens and unseen heroes. Her voice wove a spell of comfort, soft and unwavering, as if the fever itself might bow to her calm. Hours passed. The candles guttered low. Adrian stood rooted, heart pounding with a terror he had not felt since Eleanor's final night. When the first pale streak of dawn slid across the sky, Clara stirred. The fever broke like a wave receding from the shore, leaving the child cool and sleeping peacefully. Relief crashed through Adrian with such force that his knees weakened. He stepped back from the door, afraid that any sound might shatter the fragile reprieve. He did not remember walking the corridor to Isabel's chamber, only that he arrived there as the first birds began to sing. His hand lifted and knocked before he could reconsider. The door opened, and there she stood, weary and disheveled, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion yet luminous in the morning light. "You saved her," he said, voice roughened by a night of fear. Isabel shook her head. "She is strong, Your Grace. Children survive because they must." For a moment neither spoke. The air between them thickened, heavy with something unnamed. Adrian felt the pull of it like a tide, an intimacy born not of words but of shared vigil. Her gaze met his, steady and unguarded, and he knew that if he reached out he would not stop at gratitude. The realization startled him into retreat. He stepped back, drawing a breath sharp enough to cut. "You have my deepest thanks," he managed, before turning away, leaving the unspoken to burn in the silence. But rumors traveled faster than the morning sun. By noon the servants had carried whispers from kitchen to stable. The Duke had spent the night outside the governess's chamber, his shadow long in the candlelight. By evening, the story had already grown teeth. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. The Countess of Elwick arrived in a carriage lacquered like a raven's wing, claiming the storm had forced her to seek shelter. Adrian suspected otherwise. She was a woman who hungered for influence as a hawk hungers for prey. Over tea she spoke of politics and alliances, of noble women eager to bring new prosperity to Blackthorn. Her eyes, sharp as polished steel, slid toward Isabel, who stood quietly at Clara's side. "You keep interesting company," the Countess murmured, her smile thin as paper. Adrian set his cup down with deliberate care. "Miss Marin is my daughter's governess," he replied, each word measured. "Nothing more." The Countess tilted her head, the curve of her lips betraying disbelief. "A pity, then," she said, and changed the subject with a predator's grace. After she departed, the manor felt smaller, its walls closing like a fist. Adrian walked the moonlit gardens alone, the chill night pressing against his skin. Above him the stars burned cold and remote, their light indifferent to the turmoil below. He repeated the words he had spoken to the Countess, nothing more but the lie seared his conscience like a brand. Every image of Isabel came unbidden, her quiet strength, the steadiness of her hands, the soft resilience in her eyes. He could not escape the truth that had taken root in him. From the nursery drifted the faint sound of Clara's laughter, now bright with recovery, and beneath it Isabel's voice, warm and low. Adrian closed his eyes, the night air sharp in his lungs. The world expected him to remain the grieving widower, the untouchable Duke. Yet with each breath, each memory of the night's vigil, he felt the first cracks in the walls he had built around his heart. The manor slept, but within its stone heart something restless stirred, a force as quiet as dawn and as unstoppable as the tide. Spring unfurled across the valley in a wash of emerald and gold, the meadows alive with the scent of thawing earth and the songs of awakening birds. Blackthorn Manor, once cloaked in winter's shadow, seemed to breathe again, its ancient stones warmed by a sun that promised renewal. Clara's excitement grew with every lengthening day, for the festival of St. Merrill approached, a celebration of blossoms and music that set even the most stoic villagers alight with cheer. She pleaded with her father to take her, her dark eyes sparkling with anticipation, and though tradition demanded the Duke remain aloof from such rustic merriment, Adrian found himself unable to deny her. They set out in secret beneath a sky streaked with rose and copper, the road to the village alive with lantern light and the hum of distant fiddles. Adrian wore a plain cloak, its hood drawn low, and Isabel walked beside him, guiding Clara's eager steps. The smell of honey cakes and wood smoke drifted on the evening air. Clara darted from booth to booth, laughter rising like bells above the crowd, while Isabel's own laughter wove through the music, soft and lilting. Adrian felt something inside him uncoil with each sound, a tension he had carried for years loosening as if the festival's joy were a balm pressed to an old wound. They sampled sweet wine and warm bread, and for a time the Duke forgot the weight of his name. Lanterns swung overhead like captured stars, casting shifting halos across Isabel's face. She moved with easy grace among the villagers, her simple dress catching the light in fleeting glimmers. Adrian watched her share a story with a group of children, her hands sketching shapes in the air, her eyes bright as the flames that licked the night sky. A quiet wonder stirred in him, how effortlessly she belonged wherever she stood, how naturally she drew others into her circle of warmth. When Clara spotted a troop of dancers and raced ahead, Adrian and Isabel were left behind beneath an arch of hawthorn heavy with white blossoms. The fragrance hung sweet and heady, and the distant violins hummed like a secret only the night could keep. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Isabel turned toward him, the lantern glow catching the copper threads in her hair until it gleamed like molten sunset. "You should smile more," she said softly, her voice carrying the intimacy of a confession. "Your daughter watches you. She needs to see joy." He let out a breath that trembled against the stillness. "I do not remember how." A small frown touched her lips, then softened into something gentler. She reached up without thinking and brushed a single petal from his shoulder. The gesture was light as breath, yet it pierced through years of grief like a sudden spark in dry tinder. Adrian's heart jolted. Before reason could surface, his hand closed around hers, warm and sure. "Isabel," he whispered, the name tasting of prayer and warning. Her eyes widened, luminous in the lantern light. Her lips parted on a tremor of longing and fear. "We cannot," she breathed. "You are a duke." "I am." "You are everything I have searched for and did not know," he said, the words breaking from him like a tide that could no longer be held back. The space between them tightened, the air thick with the scent of hawthorn and the dangerous sweetness of desire. For a single heartbeat they stood balanced on the edge of ruin, the festival's music fading until there was only the sound of their quickened breaths. Then Clara's delighted call rang out, shattering the moment like glass struck by a stone. Isabel stepped back as though waking from a dream, and Adrian let her go, his hand falling empty to his side. They returned to the manor with the music of the fair still echoing in their ears, but the world had shifted. The weight of duty settled over Adrian like a chain. He felt it in the stiff bows of his council, in the letters from noble families pressing him to remarry, to secure alliances for the sake of the duchy. Each word was another stone stacked against the fragile hope that had ignited beneath the hawthorn arch. He refused every offer, yet each refusal tightened the noose of expectation. Whispers about Isabel swirled through the village and the manor alike. Suitors emboldened by gossip came to call, their smiles too eager, their eyes lingering too long. Adrian watched them with a coldness that belied the storm within him. He would not surrender her, but to claim her meant scandal, perhaps even the loss of everything he had sworn to protect, his name, his lands, his daughter's inheritance. Nights stretched sleepless, the echo of her voice haunting every chamber. One moonlit evening, unable to bear the distance any longer, he found her in the garden. The roses were just beginning to open, their scent mingling with the crisp air of early summer. She stood among the blooms, her face turned upward to the stars, the silver light washing her features in a quiet radiance. For a moment he simply watched, heart hammering like a man approaching the edge of a precipice. "I cannot ask you to stay," he said at last, the words rough with the agony of truth. "My name, my duty, these walls are a cage." Isabel turned, her eyes shining with unshed tears that caught the moonlight. "And if I choose the cage?" she asked. His breath caught. "You would give up your life for this?" "For you." "For her," she said simply. "But not if it means you despise yourself." Silence settled between them, a silence thick with all they could not say. The night wind rustled through the roses, carrying the scent of earth and blossoms, carrying the weight of impossible love. Adrian reached out, his fingers barely brushing hers, and for an instant the world contracted to that single point of contact. Duty roared in his mind, but the quiet pulse of her hand beneath his palm drowned it out. They stood that way as the stars wheeled overhead, two souls suspended between what the world demanded and what their hearts could no longer deny. The garden held its breath, and the night stretched long, as if time itself feared to break the fragile magic that bound them.